The Joe Rogan Experience.
I read a really disturbing thing today, and I'm not even sure if it's true, so we should find out right now. Clickety, clickety, click. Did the CDC stop tracking flu deaths for this year? Because this is what I read, and it might have been some wacko right-wing website that I was on, so you never know. But I was like, this can't be true, because the real concern is that the CDC tracks flu, and they find out that flu is lower or the same as COVID, and why we're making a big deal out of COVID, and then, you know, people riot in the streets.
That's why people can't. It's hard to tell who to trust.
It's
you
hard.
see
Yeah.
two politicians, and you see you don't trust either side, and you see everyone trying to make a power grab and use this as a way to make power or hurt an opponent or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And even with CDC, you don't know there. World Health Organization, you obviously can't tell there. You can't trust information coming out of other countries. So people at home are just like, what do I do? Safest thing to do is just to stay where I am. But you don't know who to trust. That's
It's
the whole
very
thing.
hard. It's very hard to figure out who to trust, and doctors are giving despair. What do we
On
got?
their website, I'm seeing information updated as of last week, April 18th.
For flu deaths?
It's on the CDC weekly flu surveillance. And I mean, it's all of the flu information.
So how many people have died this year from the flu?
I have to dig through here to find that information. Hold on a second.
Because the COVID deaths are, what is it at now? 55,000, I think, something like that.
For this country, yeah.
I think it's more, right? Maybe 60,000 now,
Closing in on that, yeah.
which is not a small number. It's a lot of people, but then you find out that's a bad year for the flu. That's normal. But obviously, this year we've locked everybody down worldwide even, and you know there has to be a slower spread because of this quarantining and because of the social distancing. So I would imagine you're getting far lower numbers than they would have gotten if everybody had just gone out into the streets.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. But
No doubt.
for flu, and this is my understanding because in that fourth novel that I'm writing right now, I was deep into the study of infectious diseases.
Perfect
and
for
how
you. Perfect timing,
It was
right?
crazy. And then how you weaponize those infectious diseases, what the Japanese did prior to World War II in that space, how they used them in World War II against the Chinese, what happened to that data after the war, the Soviet program from the end of World War II up to the collapse, what happened to that information, and then our programs today from the end of World War II up to and continuing through today. So I was keyed in to all that ahead of time, and so it made me a little kind of hypersensitive to this. I'd been talking to doctors, people that had worked in that space, doing my research, but from obviously I'm not a doctor, but from what I've studied, the difference here is that the incubation period. So for us, in the military, we go overseas and now we're fighting insurgents. And what do they look like? Well, they look like the people that aren't insurgents. What does that car look like that's pulling up to this checkpoint? It looks like the one that didn't have a VBID in it. Or is that one looking a little low on the suspension? So they're not in a uniform. They're not driving a military type vehicle. So same with this. It's like an insurgent that's adapted, and it's adapted to those other diseases and how we fought them. And it's adapted by the incubation period, by that 9 days. So the flu, you get the flu, you're down. You know you shouldn't go into work. If you show up at work, someone's like, bro, go home. You look horrible. Get out of here. You're going to infect everybody. You don't know that with COVID-19.
Right.
So you go out there for this 9 days, whatever it is, and you're infecting people during that time frame. So it's like that insurgent that hides amongst the populace. Yeah. It's the same type of thing. Like they've adapted. SARS was different. The flu is different. All these other ones have been different. And that's the adaptation of this one, is that you go out and you infect other people without knowing it. So that's the difference between it and the flu. So it's a hard thing to wrap your head around when you just look at numbers. But there is a difference in that flu. You're staying home. You're sick.
You know, it's really, in a lot of ways, it's a perfect way to spread a virus, because there's a video game that my wife plays. She used to play. She doesn't play anymore now that this is going down. But it was a virus video game.
Really?
You send a virus throughout the world. And the key is, if you make your virus too strong, it's a video game you play on your iPad or your phone. If you make the virus too strong, it kills people too quickly, and then it doesn't spread. So the way you get a virus everywhere is you have one that sits in your system for a little bit, and it's just weak in the beginning and slowly spreads its way across the world. And that's essentially what this is in a lot of ways. But this one's so weird, man. I mean, Newsweek actually had a story yesterday saying that they think it came from a lab. So now that theory of whether or not it came from a laboratory, I think I tweeted it. So you can find it on my Twitter page. But I was reading it yesterday. I'm like, okay, Newsweek, not really sensationalistic publication.
Right.
When they're publishing something like that, you got to go, probably something to this. And there's a lot of speculation. I mean, it's not so hard to imagine. I mean, you're talking about something that literally was a few blocks from the epicenter in Wuhan, where they had that level 4 lab.
Right. So the deal is with like the video game your wife was playing, and that the goal of that game, it sounds like, was to infect the world.
To kill the world.
But if that's not your
Fucked
goal,
up game.
if you have if you have a goal and you want your country to survive, then you don't want it to become a global pandemic. You want it to hit the city, the country, whatever geographic area you want to hit with a weaponized infectious disease. You want it to burn out in that city. So instead of going over and dropping bombs on it like World War II, like firebombing Dresden or whatever else, or Tokyo, and just destroying those cities, well, you know what? After the war, you can go in with an infectious disease and it's burnt out and there's no damage.
Yeah.
But you don't want it to spread throughout the whole world and come back to your own country. So when I first looked at this and I heard about Wuhan, I heard that there was let's say not a weapons lab maybe, but maybe it's a weapons lab, but at least a lab doing research in infectious diseases a couple miles from these wet markets where they're saying that this thing broke out. There are cases in the former Soviet Union of them doing this research into infectious diseases and weaponizing it, and then having it get out because the protocols weren't followed or whatever else, and kills a few people, and they hush it because it's 1960 something or 1970 something. So there is precedent, and it wouldn't be beyond the pale to think that someone was doing some sort of research, and it doesn't even have to be weaponization. It can just be they're just studying this infectious disease, not even weaponizing it, and someone contracts it somehow in that lab and then brings it outside.
Yeah, that's the controversial theory. So here's the thing. The controversial experiments in Wuhan lab suspected of starting the coronavirus pandemic, and says the case against a Wuhan lab. And so it says why the Wuhan lab remains a suspect in the coronavirus investigation. I mean, it's really likely that we never really will know.
Right.
But they most certainly were working on viruses similar to this one right there.
At the end of this article says there's another one called RATG13, which is very, very similar to the SARS-CoV-2 one that we're experiencing now.
Oh, terrific.
They share 96% of the same genetic material.
Yeah.
Wow. It's thought to be the most similar to SARS-CoV-2 of any known virus. The two share 96% of their genetic material. That 4% gap would still be a formidable gap for animal passage research, says Ralph Barrick, virologist, University of North Carolina, probably in bed with the Russians, who collaborated with, like, when you found out that a Harvard guy got arrested that because he was taking money from Russia, or excuse me, taking money from China because he was doing something with them. Yeah, I mean, it's real spooky. What's really spooky is the World Health Organization is essentially in bed with China.
Yeah.
And they're not giving us 100% clear, detailed information. Everything gets filtered down through the Chinese propaganda system.
Oh, sure.
Very
sure.
dangerous.
And they also were exceedingly, we don't know the numbers, right? And we can't trust China. But it seems like they were a little more prepared for this than we were with as far as testing kits goes and all that.
Yes.
So if you're doing if there's a lab where you're doing research similar to this close by, there's a history of other countries, maybe even China too, of doing research into infectious diseases, not following protocols that we would here in the United States. They're not all as safe as they are, shocker, here in the United States where we're doing the same type of research. Then it gets out, and then they just happen to have a lot of these kits ready to go for testing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, in 2018, they were actually cited for violating safety protocols at that same lab in 2018. So there were concerns about that area long before. But what's really fucked up is the World Health Organization posted in January that, according to China, there is no evidence of person-to-person transmission of this disease. This is days after they knew for sure it was being transmitted from person to person. So China has been deceptive about this from the very beginning, and they think that if they were honest about it and that they stopped everybody from leaving, they could have covered this in the point where it would have been 95% less.
I saw that.
Yeah, 95% less people would have gotten infected.
Yeah, just lock down Wuhan, deal with it there as much as you can anyway. Let the rest of the world know. I mean, looking back, that seems like, but you're dealing with China. Same thing. You're dealing with Russia. You're dealing with some of these other countries like that.
China seems the worst. It seems like the worst.
It does seem that way. It's a perfect storm.
It seems like, but the way they handle their own citizens when their citizens are testing positive, there's this horrible video of this family being dragged out by these people in hazmat suits, and they're trying to resist. These people are dragging them away. because they tested positive.
Oh, yeah. Once again, that government taking a little more control, a little more
Yes,
control, a little more control.
exactly.
And we're just giving it up. And we give up so much. And even before this, obviously, we gave up so much information about ourselves voluntarily. We would, let's say in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we never would have given up. And now we're like, oh, click accept. And bam, there
Right.
you go. Awesome. I can post a picture or whatever it is. This is fun. I can communicate with my friends.